Hello, my name is Dr. Janine Joy, and this presentation is going to cover an area of healthcare that we've been missing. The research that is documented in this slideshow comes from a multitude of scientific disciplines, and one of the problems we have in the scientific community is that the information is siloed and very few people look outside their own silo. So there's a lot of solutions we have that are critical to making America great for everyone that have not been recognized and, more importantly, have not been implemented and used. These are all about prevention. And it's not the type of prevention that you think of when you think of prevention, because the prevention that is talked about today is not true prevention. It is actually early symptom detection and treatment, which is not actually preventing problems before they occur, which we know we can do. And you remember, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If we want to reduce healthcare costs in our country, if we want an affordable way to help every American have a better life, we have to use what we know about prevention. Prevention starts with the mindset, with our habits of thought. And this is something that we don't give a lot of thought to, and there's old research from the 30s that was never validated but became widely accepted that has damaged the way we actually think about our world, and it's time to correct that mistake. We know that there are certain habits of thought that are not healthy. The outcomes they lead to are far less than optimal results. Catastrophizing or awfulizing, which is seeing a problem and thinking that it's a permanent and pervasive problem, is one type of thinking. And what happens is thoughts are habitual, they are habits. And so when somebody starts thinking that something is permanent and pervasive, they think that about things that aren't permanent. And when they think that, their brain tries to prove their beliefs to them, so they don't look for solutions because they don't believe that there are any. Negative rumination and negative co-rumination is basically looking at things that have happened from the negative perspective. But there's always a silver lining. Knowing how to find that silver lining, knowing to look for it, being open to it, is a healthy habit of thought. Negative co-rumination involves two or more people getting together and basically, excuse my language, but having a bitch session where they just complain about what is instead of what could be. And it's not healthy in the long term. If the negative rumination sparks a conversation about what can we do, then it's fine. But if it just stays there in the negativity, it hurts the people who are involved in the conversation. Self-criticism is another negative habit of thought. We do not need to denigrate ourselves. We do not need to decide that we are not good or that we are bad or that we're not as worthy or as good as others. In order to improve, all we have to do is decide we would like to be a little better in this area or that area, or we wish we'd done that better and next time we will. We don't need to beat ourselves up again and again and again. And when we do, it stops us from trying. It can lead to anxiety. It's a habit of thought that it's like it adds pounds of weight to us as we move through life. Low self-esteem is often indicated by self-criticism, but it can also simply reflect a feeling of not being worthy, a feeling of not being good enough, a feeling of having something lacking. And a person who has low self-esteem is going to do one of two things. They're not going to try things, or they're not going to be receptive when people interact with them in ways where they're trying to help them because they're trying to defend their own position. It just makes for relationships that aren't healthy and aren't good, and it's not a very comfortable place to live either. Suppressing negative emotions, and even some people suppress positive emotions to try to fit in. Maybe they're happy and everybody around them isn't as happy, and they try to suppress their emotions. Or maybe they're unhappy and they don't know what to do about it, so they suppress their emotions. Suppressing emotions is one of the absolute worst ways to respond to emotions. And then pessimism is a negative habit of thought. It's a habit of thought that really doesn't believe that there are ways to solve a problem, doesn't believe things will get better. And you never move towards better when you don't think it could be better. So when you look at your habits of thought and then you look at your level of stress, the habits of thought determine the level of stress. We all know people who things happen in their lives and they just seem to keep going merrily on their way, when those things that happen in their life would throw a lot of people for a loop, maybe even into a downward spiral, because they somehow seem to just be able to keep going, but not through emotional suppression, where other people, a little thing happens and it throws their whole day or the whole month or even the whole year out of whack. And the reason for the different responses to situations comes from the habits of thought and the mindset. But they're habits. They're something that an individual can choose to change. They're just learned habits, and those habits may or may not serve the individual. If they are leading the individual to lead a life that is less than it could be, obviously they're not serving them well. If the habits of thought increase stress, they're not serving them. So this relationship is the key to prevention, and healthy habits of thought reduce the level of stress. And now I'm going to go through a series of relationships between stress, which is always related to the habits of thought and mindset, more than it's related to one's circumstances, and show you how stress impacts every area of life and why it's so critical that we start teaching Americans, our children, our parents, our teachers, our employees, everyone that we possibly can reach, how to develop healthier habits of thought. A situation that somebody is in is the facts of the situation, but the amount of stress that they feel can be multiplied or added to, subtracted from, or divided depending upon their healthy or unhealthy habits of thought. The way that the person perceives the event increases or decreases the stress response. The worst outcomes come from mindsets that multiply the amount of stress the individual feels. A person whose habits of thought add to the amount of stress does not have as bad of outcomes as the one who's got a multiplying factor, but they're still far from where they want to be. The ones who learn to subtract from the amount of stress have better outcomes, but the best outcomes are when the amount of stress is divided using mental techniques where they see the opportunities, looking for the silver lining as soon as you realize that something is happening that you don't like, looking for the solution, not focusing on the problem. It is literally possible to be in the middle of a layoff where you're being laid off during a bad economic situation and be thinking that there's going to be a silver lining and actually being somewhat excited and eager to find out what that is, even before you know what it's going to be. I know it's possible because I've been there and I've done it. And it wasn't because I had a huge economic well from which to draw to see me through. I was a single parent with 2 kids in college and a mortgage and a car payment. And yet I sat there when the subsidiary that I worked for was being closed down, and I knew that something better was coming. And I wasn't stressed. I was actually trying not to show my excitement because I realized my coworkers were stressed and I didn't want to seem insensitive. But I knew I'd be okay. And 30 hours later, somebody reached out to me and offered me something. And it was because of my attitude, that my positive expectation that happened. But I'm not special and I'm not unique. Anybody can do what I did in that situation and in other types of situations that most people consider highly stressful. So when our stress level goes up, our risky behaviors go up. What types of risky behaviors am I talking about? Things like reckless driving. Have you ever known someone who got in a fight with someone and got in their car and drove too fast, drove recklessly because they were upset? Well, that upset is a form of stress. Another type of risky behavior that increases when stress goes up is risky sexual behavior, whether it's not using protection or it's saying yes when typically you would have said no if you weren't stressed. There's a whole lot of different situations where risky behaviors increase when stress is higher. And those behaviors contribute to the public health situation. The reckless driving could lead to car accidents, it could lead to premature death, and the risky sexual behavior can lead to a greater disease burden. It can also lead eventually to death, depending on what happens because of the risky behaviors. Or it could lead to increased poverty if there's an unplanned pregnancy that derails somebody's college plans or impairs their ability to hold their job. There's a lot of other factors. We can't use one-dimensional thinking to solve the problems that we're facing. We have to say, if this happens, then what might happen because of that, and then what might happen because of that. And when you start looking at layers of potential outcomes, it becomes so clear that changing this one thing affects a multitude of things downstream. Smoking is impacted by stress. The research shows that today 61% of the people who still smoke cigarettes suffer from anxiety. Well, anxiety is high stress, and smoking is deep breathing, which can actually help them with the anxiety. So they're finding it difficult to quit smoking because it's helping them with another problem. If we teach them how to reduce the anxiety, then becoming a non-smoker will be an easier feat for them to accomplish. But as we hammer them to stop smoking, all we're doing is increasing their anxiety, which makes this relationship with smoking helping anxiety even stronger. So we have to address the anxiety in order to help people stop smoking. Alcohol abuse. Alcohol is a downer. When you're happy, you don't want to drink because it makes you feel worse. You might have a glass of wine with friends, but you're not going to get drunk and you're not going to get mind-numbing. You do that when you want to dull how you feel, when you don't like the way you feel. It can help them, somebody who's unhappy, feel better because it's dulling the emotional pain that they're experiencing. And happiness is stress and happiness have an inverse relationship. When stress goes up, happiness goes down. When happiness goes up, stress goes down. So there's a direct link to alcohol abuse. And there's also a direct link to drug abuse. Drug abuse starts when someone is stressed. They don't feel good. They want to feel better. Even peer pressure it's a form of stress. And someone who knows how to manage stress doesn't feel as much stress from peer pressure as someone who's not good at managing stress. And then if they had a healthier solution to the negative emotions that they're trying to escape with drugs, they would use it. Humans choose the best method that they know. But if they don't know a better method, they will choose something like drug abuse. Drug abuse starts when taking drugs is less stressful than not taking drugs. When it comes to exercise, a lot of the prevention programs, in addition to smoking, try to get people to exercise. But the research shows that 43% of people who regularly exercise to reduce stress don't do it when they feel too stressed. They simply feel too stressed to exercise, even when the person knows they'll feel better if they do exercise. So clearly, if we help people reduce stress, 43% is almost half of the people. We would have more people exercising more often, and that would have a positive impact on public health. Eating habits is another area where stress has a tremendous impact. We all know about comfort foods. There's even restaurants with menus that call certain dishes comfort foods. Most Americans have a comfort food that they turn to when they feel down. For some, like in the cartoon Kathy, they turn to half a gallon of ice cream. For some, it's meatloaf and mashed potatoes or fried chicken, sweets or popcorn or potato chips. It really doesn't matter what the comfort foods are. People have them, and they tend to be higher calorie and higher fat. And what we found in the research is that 72% of the people who have committed to and are following a diet in order to maintain or lose weight go off that diet when they feel highly stressed. And when they go off the diet, they don't just go to their normal eating instead of the diet eating. They actually go to higher calorie and higher fat foods than they normally consume. 72% of dieters have negative choices that go against what they want when they feel too stressed. That's a humongous number. And so if they had techniques to reduce their stress, they would have better outcomes from their diets, which again would have a very positive impact on public health. Stress impacts health, our physical health, on so many levels. At the biochemical level, the stress hormones interfere with our digestive function. So what that means is that when you eat something and you're not stressed, your body processes it in a healthier way than it does when you eat the same foods and you're stressed. And that stress and the impact it has on the digestive function increases the risk for both obesity and type 2 diabetes. There's some other chronic diseases that there's an impact as well, but I'm staying high level here. I've already talked about how stress impacts eating habits and exercise. Immune function declines when we are stressed. So our body's natural resources to fight illnesses and disease decline when we're stressed. The risk of preterm birth increases for women who are stressed, particularly women who have experienced chronic stress. And many women experience chronic stress. And when you think about negative habits of thought, if they have habits of thought that keep them stressed, then, and it creates a preterm birth, that just adds to their stress level because preemies tend to have more health problems, and often those health problems are chronic. So now you have a woman with unhealthy habits of thought who is chronically stressed, who's now had a preterm baby, who's going to have health issues. And we also know that there are some illnesses that the children are more likely to have when the mother is depressed during pregnancy. And those, depression comes from not feeling, from feeling stressed. So all of those things are impacted. And then we also know that the central nervous system is negatively impacted by stress, and that there are increased accidents when somebody's stressed. Everything from something as simple as a stubbed toe, which clearly doesn't impact public health, but all the way up to and including fatal car accidents and work-related accidents, both of which have an impact on the broader society. Mental health and suicide are significantly impacted by stress. All of the unhealthy habits of thought that I went over are risk factors for mental illness and for suicide. The inverse relationship between stress and happiness is very important with mental health. Depression is a low emotional state with a sustained lack of hope. Anxiety is high stress that often occurs in common situations, just socializing. Both schizophrenia and psychosis are typically preceded by an event that is a significant stressor. But what's really important to remember is that not everybody would see that situation as being the same level of stress. Somebody with healthy habits of thought might see a situation as no more than a pebble in the road. They might feel capable of dealing with it. They might feel like it didn't derail their life. Whereas somebody who has negative, unhealthy habits of thought, who's been under a lot of stress because of those habits of thought, that thing that occurs before psychosis or a schizophrenia diagnosis can just be the final straw in the wake that's caused by unhealthy habits of thought. And learning skills-based happiness, which is learning and developing healthy habits of thought has already successfully treated depression, anxiety, severe PTSD, and prevented imminent suicides. There are no immunizations for mental illness. We don't have a vaccine for mental illness. But if there was one that was effective, healthy habits of thought would be just as effective. Healthy habits of thought are what keep people from developing mental illness. Even when there's a family history of mental illness, if someone develops healthy habits of thought, they do not become mentally ill. Suicide reflects a lack of optimism, which is a key ingredient in resilience, and resilience increases as an individual increases their healthy habits of thought. So mental illness is significantly impacted, as is physical health, by one's habits of thought. And crime is another factor that is impacted. There's recent research that is demonstrating that happy people aren't committing crime. And even gang members, when you look at the mental health of gang members, it's really awful. And then when you think about healthy habits of thought prevent those mental illnesses in the gang members, maybe they wouldn't be gang members if and be committing crimes if they had healthy habits of thought in the first place. And there's budding research that is showing that helping even people who most of society has given up on develop healthier habits of thought does reduce crime and improve outcomes in things like education. It's really, this is such a powerful thing that we could do. We just need to do it. Crime is basically a misguided attempt to feel better by someone who doesn't have the skill set or the tools to feel better using their mindset. Career success is significantly impacted by one's habits of thought. Somebody who is happy and optimistic has far better long-term success than someone who is pessimistic. This has been proven with longitudinal studies that followed people for over 70 years. And so people who had equivalent educations, equivalent contacts, people who you would have thought would have good outcomes because they had solid foundations on which to build, did not have good outcomes when they had unhealthy habits of thought. The ones who had healthy habits of thought did very well. Educational success is much like career success. The people who believe that it's going to help them, that believe that they can find a way to do it, do much better than the ones who are pessimistic about it, the ones who have unhealthy habits of thought. All of these things help healthy relationships, but healthy habits of thought help relationships the most. And relationships are at the root. They're one of the things that contribute significantly to good physical and mental health. And when you think about it, there's a lot of clues. They say, a happy wife equals a happy life, or if mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. And we hear those things. We know they're true. And yet we don't think about, okay, well, how do we make these people happy? But the thing is, nobody can make someone else happy unless the person wants to be happy. Happiness really is an inside job. And the key to being happy is having healthy habits of thought, because they look at the bright side. They have an optimistic outlook, not a Pollyannish, rose-colored glasses outlook, but they see the solution when somebody else is looking at the problem. And they see the potential in others, not the problems in others. Healthy relationships and a lower divorce rate are possible if people are taught how to have healthy habits of thought. And then when you think about a lower divorce rate, you can think about less poverty. You can think about children being raised in more stable environments. That one has layer after layer after layer of benefit to society and to individuals. Diversity appreciation. You cannot decide that some group of people are going to be hated by you, disliked by you, despised by you, and walk around in a world where those people exist and feel good. You have to find perspectives that appreciate something about everyone, every group of people, whether it's based on race or religion, political affiliation, gender, education level. It really doesn't matter what the group is. You can't be exposed continually to people that you have decided are somehow wrong or bad and feel good. So when you develop healthy habits of thought, one of the things you do is you decide you would rather feel good than bad. You pay attention to how you feel. So when you start encountering a group of people that you're having a hard time finding something to think about that's good, which actually if you have a positive outlook, you're far less likely to do anyway. But if you are having a difficult time, you will make a conscious effort to find some benefit in those people. I remember it's been over 30 years ago. I went to visit some distant relatives that lived in the deep South. And having been raised employee engagement, which has been at about 30%, has a tremendous impact on productivity at work. And an employee who is not engaged isn't having fun. They're stressed. They're not in the flow at work. So think about going to a job and spending 40 hours a week being where you don't want to be, doing what you don't want to do. All of that is highly stressful. But employee engagement, the largest factor that contributes to employee engagement is an employee's core self-evaluations, which are things like self-esteem and whether or not they think they can do things, whether they feel appreciated. But whether they feel appreciated has more to do with their habits of thought than their actual situation. Because somebody who doesn't believe they're good, who doesn't think that they have value, does not hear a compliment from a boss the same way someone who feels like they're doing a good job hears it. They literally, their brain processes the information differently. And developing healthy habits of thought increases employee engagement and reduces the stress from employees who aren't engaged, which has a ripple effect in many areas, including healthy relationships, mental health, physical health, eating, alcohol and drug abuse, smoking, almost everything that impacts physical and mental health can be impacted with a worker who is stressed. And this is a way, the fact that it's going to help companies because employee engagement has a positive impact on customer satisfaction and productivity and turnover, and then the health aspects have a positive impact on absenteeism. Employers that understand this relationship will be more than willing to participate in training large numbers of Americans how to have healthier habits of thought. Now remember, healthy habits of thought is not teaching someone what to think. It's teaching them how their brain processes information and how to change habits of thought. Every individual decides what they want to think, and they decide what they want to change. But changing from unhealthy habits of thought to healthy habits of thought feels good. So they want to do it because everybody is driven by a desire to feel better. Which brings us to happiness. Healthy habits of thought increase happiness. Unhealthy habits of thought decrease happiness. So let's go back to this root cause solution. Healthy habits of thought impact the level of stress. That's the root for all those other factors we've just covered. And it's not difficult to change. It's a whole lot easier to help somebody reduce their level of stress and prevent them from becoming a smoker, prevent them from becoming an alcoholic, prevent them from using illegal drugs, than it is to try to stop the behavior without first dealing with the stress. And even for individuals who are already on those paths of alcoholism or addiction, smoking, once they understand how to feel better without those crutches, they'll be self-motivated to improve. Nobody who is a smoker in today's society really wants to smoke. You're ostracized from society. It's incredibly expensive. It separates you from a lot of people. Alcoholism. Nobody who is an alcoholic really wants to be an alcoholic. What they want is to feel good. If you teach them how to feel good, they'll be motivated to stop the other behaviors. And it's the same with drug abuse. They'll be motivated to stop the behaviors that are not healthy if they believe they can feel better in a different way. So teaching someone how to have healthy habits of thought that increase happiness and reduce stress will have a ripple effect of people believing that they'll be okay without alcohol, without drugs, without smoking, without comfort foods. Remember, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. In this case, I think it's worth 100 pounds of cure. The only way to know for sure is to do this on a broad basis. There is a huge body of scientific research that supports these relationships and the solution. They're coming from a lot of different areas of science, not one silo. They come from psychology and psychiatry and medical science and psychoneuroimmunology and biochemistry and medical science, criminology. All of those have contributed to support this root cause, and there's other branches as well. And so I'm not putting all the scientific support in this presentation. I have documented it quite thoroughly in a number of books that I've written. And I wanted to mention before I go into the books two other things that I didn't mention, and that is the research is very clear that pain, particularly chronic pain, but even just like pain following a surgery or an injury, when stress goes up, the level of pain goes up. When stress goes down, the level of pain goes down. Sleep quality is significantly impacted by stress. We have an epidemic of sleep problems in our country, and sleep problems reduce our ability to have good relationships, and poor sleep impacts things like accidents and even cognitive abilities, and it also impacts our decisions about our behaviors. This book, Rescue Our Children from the War Zone, has the most documentation of the relationships between healthy habits of thought and all the things I've already mentioned in this presentation. Today, children that are born and raised in poverty in the United States, 2/3 of them end up in prison, dead, or addicted. Only 1/3 of those children have decent outcomes. Not that those outcomes couldn't be even better than they are, but at least they're not in prison, addicted, or dead. But that means we're losing 2/3 of those children, and it could be prevented. We've already got good longitudinal evidence that teaching children social and emotional skills, teaching them how to be resilient, basically teaching them healthy habits of thought, gives them a significant advantage. They can rise up and overcome early obstacles, even early obstacles that are horrendous stories. So if you wanted the most comprehensive scientific evidence, this book has, I believe it's 760 citations that link to the research. Prevent Suicide the Smart Way is mostly about teaching resilience so that people don't become suicidal. Suicide is happening with younger and younger children. It's now the second most common cause of death for 10-year-olds. That's disgusting. It's disgusting that we lose 22 veterans a day to suicide. We know how to prevent suicide. Long before the crisis, we need to do it. There's research in here that supports the premise, and there's techniques that teach resilience. And those will go a long way to preventing a lot of suicides in the future. Because remember, for every one of those attempted suicides, there are another 24, 25 attempts. The completed suicides are a small fraction of the attempts that happen every day. We are the richest country in the world. We have to do better. We can do better. True Prevention, Optimum Health documents a lot of the research that ties stress and illness and shows that the illnesses are prevented by reducing stress. Is punishment ethical? The fallacy of good and evil. In this book, I dove into the research on what causes crime. and what prevents crime. And the solution is teaching people healthy habits of thought, because criminal behavior comes from someone who's stressed and they need relief and they don't know a better way to relieve themselves. The person who's worried about finances and a bad economy, or who is worried about getting money to pay the rent when they don't have a job, might turn to crime if they can't find a way to use their mind to believe that there's a better solution. But if they've developed psychological flexibility, they can find a way to find better solutions. And so we really need to look at our criminal justice system, not just for reform, but for transformation. If we teach people how to use their minds and have healthy habits of thought, fewer people will ever commit crimes. And that is prevention worth doing. Empowered Employees Become Engaged Employees details the relationship between habits of thought and employee engagement. And it's the key to getting employers involved and committed to helping with a nationwide effort to teach healthy habits of thought to every child and adult, to everyone we can reach. The smart way to prevent crime is punishment ethical, and expands it in is punishment ethical. I basically documented the research. In this one, it's the documentation of the research to some extent, but there's a greater emphasis on how do you develop the healthy habits of thought. Those same techniques are in Rescue Our Children. And then one of my newest books is Schizophrenia, Reconstructed in a New Paradigm. In the medical model of looking at schizophrenia, there is no recovery. But when you take it out of that paradigm and you take each symptom individually and you compare those symptoms to emotional state, which is largely determined by habits of thought, you see that the same symptom in someone who's at a low emotional state is viewed quite differently when the person is in a positive mental state. But a diagnosis of a permanent mental illness like schizophrenia, which is what people who are diagnosed are told, is that there is no recovery, even though there's evidence of people who have recovered and function very well. That permanent pervasive diagnosis tends to keep people in that low emotional state and hinders their ability to develop healthy habits of thought that could help them move towards recovery. Thank you. You can contact me on LinkedIn, or you can contact me at 704-251-5150. I'm Dr. Janine Joy. I'm the founder of Happiness First Institute, a Thrive More Now company.